Live from the Business RadioX studio inside Renaissance Bank, the bank that specializes in understanding you. It's time for North Fulton Business Radio.
And hello again, everyone. Welcome to yet another edition of North Fulton Business Radio. I'm John Ray, and we are still virtual. We're not inside our studio at Renaissance Bank, but hopefully that day is coming sometime soon. But in the meantime, we've still got some great business leaders, and I'm particularly excited about this show. We're going to be speaking here shortly with Joe Iarocci, and he is the founder of Cairnway Coaching. We're going to be talking about servant leadership. But before we get to Joe, just a reminder that Renaissance Bank we still love them, even though we're not with them, but they're still out there doing good work. In fact, the branches are open. You can go to the branch and go through the drive-through, and it's amazing how many things you can do at the drive-through. You can actually open accounts, folks. But if you want to go inside the branch and have a 6-foot paced face-to-face, you can do that in this age of social distancing, but you do have to make an appointment. So give them a call and be in touch. They've done a great job with a lot of these PPP loans. I know this because I have worked with them myself on some of my clients. So I'm not saying that because I get paid to say it. I'm saying it because it's happened with my clients. So check them out. If you need some assistance on that, just go to renaissancebank.com. You can find their offices. They've got 190 offices throughout the South ready to serve you. And you can also give them a call. So you're at your local Renaissance office. Renaissance Bank, understanding you, member FDIC. And now, as I mentioned, we're welcoming Joe Iarocci. He's still surprised that I can pronounce that, but he's laughing at me because I'm Scottish and not Italian. But he is with Cairnway Coaching, and Joe, it's a pleasure to have you back. Actually,
that's right, John. That's right. Thanks for having me.
This is great. So, our subject today is servant leadership in a COVID-19 environment. We'll get to that in a second, more on that in a second, but give people a little bit about you and your background.
Sure, John. I started my career as a Wall Street lawyer. I spent a lot of years at CARE International as general counsel and CFO, the big nonprofit here in Atlanta, fighting poverty around the world, and became super interested in leadership. I realized and believe so strongly that the solution to any great problem, whether it's world poverty or climate change or COVID-19, is not a function of money or technology or human resources, but a function of leadership. So I've spent the last piece of my career now advancing this notion of servant leadership. I do it through executive coaching for individuals, for teams, work a lot with teams, and I do a lot with boards of directors too. So it's leadership development, it's a coaching approach, it's servant leadership.
Awesome work. That is quite a journey from Wall Street attorney to servant leadership. You don't actually put those two in the same sentence often, right? And I can say that because I used to work on Wall Street and reformed myself. So
That's true. Most people don't. But I will tell you that there are some fabulous lawyers and law firms committed to this notion of servant leadership and committed publicly and organizationally. So earlier this year, I joined together with Kilpatrick and Townsend, a giant international law firm, one of the top law firms in the world, that has committed itself to advancing servant leadership in its own culture and with its legal work. So yes, that's true, but there are still some great ones out there.
Well, the reason they're fabulous is because they're committed to this concept, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I thought. Sir. I thought that's the way that works. So we hear this term a lot, though, Joe. Servant leadership. What is it? I mean, I think that may be an obvious question for some, but not others. How do you define it?
It's so interesting, John, that I could spend, 3 days defining it. And if you had 50 guests on the show, you'd have 50 different definitions. But most simply put, it's leading in the service of others. Leading in the service of others is the simple definition, which when you unpack that, it's not about leading for the service of the leader. It's not about leading for fame and fortune and glory. It's about putting others first and measuring your own success as a leader by the success of those you serve.
And I mean, that sounds like to me what a lot of on the surface, and I kind of know where you're going with this, so I've kind of cheated on this, but I mean, if you didn't know better, seriously, you would think, okay, that's really what leadership is. I mean, not just servant leadership, but that's what leadership is, right? Is serving the folks that work for you or what have you. But you say no.
I say no to that. What makes servant there's a lot of different forms of leadership. There are command and control and dictatorial forms. There are cult forms where it's about the personality. There's charismatic forms where it's about the charisma of the leader. Servant leadership, it is great leadership, and maybe you and I are so much in tune. We see it that way. It comes out of this desire to serve others. That's the heart of it. It's the soul of it. It's the source of it, which not every leader has. And the second thing that distinguishes it from other forms of leadership, it's about the greater good. It's about the commonwealth. And it's not just about me winning or my team winning or my department winning or my company winning. It's about the broadest list of stakeholders benefiting from the leadership. So it makes it different. It doesn't mean there aren't great leaders who are military generals giving orders or football coaches doing what they do. It just means that servant leadership is about something bigger.
I would imagine that there are some folks that hear you talk and they think, oh, this is going to make me a pushover. And that's not what you say at all. No, sir.
I once gave a talk on servant leadership at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And I can tell you the leadership development at the Air Force Academy was based on this notion of servant leadership. And I can tell you those guys are not pushovers. I mean, they are right. They are as serious as, when they talk about impact, they really mean impact, So when you look at the great companies that have been built on this, Starbucks. When Starbucks had 6 stores, every employee was brought into this notion of servant leadership. I could list on companies like Southwest Airlines and others that built great brands and successful companies and were by no means pushovers based on servant leadership.
Folks, we're speaking with Joe Iarocci, and Joe is with Cairnway Coaching. I'm getting it right there, so working on it.
You're Scottish. You should be able to say that.
I should be, right? I mean, it's a travesty. Yeah, Cairn, exactly. Talk about that, because we were talking about it before we came on the air, and I love the story. I mean, it's really a fascinating story that directly ties into your business.
Sure. A cairn, it's a Scottish word. It's a stack of stones, and it was used to commemorate. Could be a gravesite. It could be a great battle, but there were commemorative stones, and that's where the word comes from. A cairn terrier is, if any one of our listeners who has ever seen The Wizard of Oz knows that Toto was a cairn terrier. A cairn terrier is a Scottish breed that flushed out game from around the cairns in Scotland. So that's some trivia. Someday someone will have that on a trivia question. What kind of dog was Toto? Right. Now, cairns are common where there's hiking trails on the Appalachian trails. They're stacks of stones that guide people, that warn people of danger. Sometimes they're just funny and to entertain people. So wherever you see a stack of stones, that's a cairn. And I chose the name for the firm because I thought it was a great metaphor about guiding people, helping people that you don't even know, right? The climbers and the hikers that come along, you don't know who they are. So I just like the metaphor of it. So Cairn, yes.
Yeah. So
like a true Scotsman that you must be.
That's right. Well, I'm a few generations removed, but let's talk about the subject at hand. So servant leadership in this pandemic, this COVID-19 environment we find ourselves in. What does that look like for you? And where are you seeing that?
Well, a crisis brings out kind of the best and worst in people. So whether it's COVID-19 or any other crisis, sometimes people emerge as great leaders and sometimes people show their worst sides. I've been particularly impressed by watching Dr. Anthony Fauci. He illustrates, at least in his public presence, right, what we can see on the news and read about him. You never know for sure, right? But from what I read and see about Dr. Fauci is he does exhibit the behaviors and traits of a servant leader. So he as best everything I can read about the man, he comes out of his role. He comes out of his role as one of servant, right? He has been for 20, 30 years in the health arena, the immunology and all that sort of thing. He was very active during the, HIV/AIDS period. So he's the real deal, right? He's not on that stage to get money or fame or a book contract or a movie about him, right? He's about service. If you read about his early life, you find he was, was educated and brought up to, he says it quite directly, it was in a Jesuit tradition of service to others and not about money or fame or fortune. So he's the real deal. He's got a certain humility about him, right? Mm-hmm. In a certain way, John, I think Dr. Fauci is running the country in a certain way over the last few weeks. He won't do it forever, but he's done it from the back, right? He's not an elected politician. He's not the president. He's not the vice president. But in a way, his leadership kind of from a relatively low position, in the grand scheme of power, is he's done a masterful job with that. Humility, calm and steady. It's never about him. He tells it like it is. He's transparent. He gets up every morning at 5 a.m, I read, and he spends the better part of his morning reviewing scientific papers. He then goes to the White House where he spends the afternoon with the various committees and politicians, and he spends the evening doing media, and then he works longer reading papers till 3 a.m. He gets 3 hours of sleep a night often. So, I've been so impressed watching him as a model of good leadership.
Now, one thing that's so obvious about him that we take it for granted is he's not the top guy. So the point of that is that you don't have to be the top person in an organization to be a leader, right?
Absolutely. Correct.
Say more on that.
So, right, if we had an org chart and, Dr. Fauci, you'd be pretty low down on it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Secretary of Health and all these sorts of things.
Right.
Right. And the thing about servant leadership is that one can be a leader with no direct reports. One can be a leader as a junior staff member, new to an organization. It doesn't depend on your title or your seniority or your education or your, whatever else. Mm-hmm. It's about your moral authority and your influence on people. So that's what makes it so powerful, is that it's not about where you sit on the org chart, or whether you have a corner office or a big title or something like that.
Mm.
And Fauci demonstrates that. I mean, really, I do think in a way he has been leading the entire country, from where he's at.
What is there anybody that stands out in the business world through this environment? Because just like government health and public health, this is a time where folks have distinguished themselves or otherwise, as right. You say, crises seem to do, bring out the best or worst in what really is there with folks. Have you seen anybody in the business world that stands out for you?
I think without mentioning names, that you can see the organizations that seem to be more concerned about their employees than others.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that have maybe gone the extra mile for their employees and their staff members and trying to keep them on board, keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the servant leadership game is that the people you read about, you have to wonder, you have to be skeptical, right, of the famous big name people. Right? I'm not saying that Schultz, the head of Starbucks, is not a servant leader, and by every account he is. But the famous guys like him, has said some powerful things that are in favor of the staff there and the team there.
Mm-hmm.
It's the little guys, though, John. I think it's the bank that is sponsoring this show. I've heard I've got some friends that have had great experiences with Ascent Bank.
Mm-hmm.
It's the local dry cleaner. It's the folks working at the local Trader Joe's, and those are the ones I think that I've seen some great things from.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. The banking industry, we'll just speak to it from an industry perspective. I mean, I could name some other names beyond Renaissance that I know have helped folks that are not customers, right? So there's a great example. And then some of the bigger banks, we won't mention any of those names.
No, let's not do that.
Yeah, but some of the and there's some smaller banks that have done this too. But and it's overgeneralization, admittedly. But then there's some other banks that have, you've got to be a lending customer for them to have helped you, which is saying they're really going after their own self-interest there, right? They're trying to prop up their own clients.
I know some folks that have gone to Renaissance for the PPP and the service and the care, and fantastic. I would list that one. If you asked me to list some organizations in the Atlanta area, I'd list that one.
So what? And there's a point to this. I'm not trying to either shout out or denigrate anybody here. What I'm trying to get to with all this is part of servant leadership in this environment seems to be thinking about how you help, how you assist, how you bring care to people, whether it benefits you in the short run or not.
Yes, for sure. It's because remember, if this idea of servant leadership comes out of this desire to serve, and you can see that magnificently,
mm-hmm.
during these tough times.
For sure. Folks, we're speaking with Joe Iarocci. Great guy. He's with Cairnway, the leadership, servant leadership, and does coaching, speaking, teaching around the world. Because I see you on social media when travel is allowed.
Not anymore.
When travel is allowed, I see you all over the place.
Yeah, and I used to be a lot of time on Delta Airlines.
Oh yeah,
another great company, by the way. Those guys. But man, now it's all about Zoom.
Who are talk about some of the folks you work with, because I think people are going to want to give you a call when this is when they hear this interview. But talk about some of the folks you work with and how you work with people. Let's get that out there.
So I work with a kind of a mix of organizations. Some are big, like The Kilpatrick Townsend Law Firm is a fantastic organization here in town, and I work with small organizations. I work with I'm corresponding today with a small organization in Nairobi, Kenya, that helps connect small farmers to people in urban Nairobi who want fresh food, and I work with their board of directors. I work with in town companies around the country. I've done a lot with the Conrad Hilton Foundation recently out in California.
Mm-hmm.
Nonprofits, for-profits. It's sort of a mix, Yeah. It's sort of a mix. You find people that are interested in they have an impulse towards the servant leadership. They want to practice it more consistently and consciously. So we help do that. And the smartest leaders, know that this way of leading over time, maybe not in the short first day, but over time, leads to higher profits. It leads to higher employee engagement, lower turnover, more donations if you're a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
It is, every bit of evidence out there suggests that organizations that embrace this outperform their peers. They don't do it for that reason, but they seem to. So smart people. I work with smart people, smart and good. I love people that are smart and good.
That helps. Now let's talk about a term that you used in a recent post you made, a recent essay you published, called A Leader's COVID-19 Mindset. Let's get into that. What do you mean by that?
So when the COVID-19 crisis broke, there was a lot of immediately, from the Harvard Business Review to on down, all kinds of advice for leaders and organizations on how to respond to it, right? And I noticed from the beginning, most of them were relatively speaking rather tactical. So ask your landlord to give you some free rent. Renegotiate with your vendors, reduce your staff, switch to new lines of business, things like this, right? And I said, that's, okay, I get that. But before one begins those tactics, one needs to optimally kind of figure out what's my attitude about this. So a mindset is it's an attitude, it's an inclination, it's an approach, right? And the thing about a mindset is it's something you can choose, right? What struck me in the early days of this COVID-19 problem, people feel powerless, right? They feel powerless. The business is closed, et cetera, et cetera. Well, yes, that's true, but there are some things one can still choose in a time of crisis, and that's your mindset. It's your choice, right? So I said this is where people need to start before they get to the tactics, I think. So I identified three mindsets. They're pairs. They're pairs. One is whether you choose an abundance or a scarcity mindset. Right? Abundance is it's an attitude. It's about there's plenty enough for everybody. Let's grow the pie. A scarcity mindset is more about, zero sum. And I said, the people with the scarcity mindset are the ones hoarding toilet paper, right? It's a mindset. Trust me, I've been to 49 countries around the world. You can survive quite well without regular old toilet paper. Right? So do you choose an abundance mindset or do you choose a scarcity mindset? It's your choice. The next was asset or liability mindset, right? Some people quickly go to all the problems I've got, all my weaknesses, all my deficits. Other people approach a problem with, what assets do I have? What are my pluses? What's in the plus column, the pros column? So again, it's something you choose, right? It's something you choose. I'm going to build on my strengths, or I'm going to cry about my weaknesses. And then the final one is kind of clever. It's a fragile or anti-fragile, fragile or anti-fragile? Some things, are fragile and they break under stress, right? They crumble or they run away from stress. And other things, strangely enough, actually benefit from stress. It's kind of counterintuitive in part. Nicholas Nassim Taleb is the guy who kind of coined this term, but you do find sometimes that things blossom in a crisis. Leaders blossom in a crisis, right? Instead of running from it, they face it. I bet we could make a list if we tried of great leaders who kind of almost emerged out of nowhere in a crisis, Lech Walesa in Poland, right? Kind of, he was just a regular working guy back in the years ago. And that, that crisis, he came out, he was kind of just a regular old guy and he came out of nowhere. So this fragile, which is you run from it and you shrink from it, or anti-fragile where you grow from it, is kind of the third one I explored. So all these mindsets, the most important thing to remember, I think, is that it's a choice, and then your tactics will be influenced, by how you're coming at it. Do I hunker down or do I advance? Do I try to launch a new product line or try to save the few that I've got? Those are the kind of the questions these mindsets address.
And rising to the occasion is going to be difficult if you're just focused on the tactics and you don't have a guiding principle, correct?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. My sense is a lot of people are just panicked by everything, and without the guiding principle or the vision of the better world that existed before the crisis, they're just sort of lost. They're just splashing and trying not to drown, as opposed to swimming towards some destination.
Right. Folks, we're speaking with Joe Iarocci. Joe is the founder of Cairnway Coaching, Cairnway Consulting. He is a expert in servant leadership. Joe, this has been great. I've got tons of questions, but we're going to have to just kind of cut it off at some point, and then I'll pick your brain later. But we're going to give your
pickings there, John.
Oh, come on now.
Come
on now. But any last words of advice that you would give to leaders during this time?
Bear in mind that this too shall pass. Bear in mind that leaders are like tuning forks, in that, the followers, those around them, will tend to give off the same vibes, John, as the leader gives off. So if it's one of calm and steadiness, that vibe will be given off. So, and if it's one of panic or hysteria or anxiety, that vibe will be given off. And then I think, the final one, just, I have found and believe, and I think from my work in servant leadership, believe that when things are the darkest, whether it's the day or the week or the hour, finding, turning to service, turning outward and not inward to service is a great way to boost yourself up, serving others. So, there's plenty of opportunity to do that now in our work. So
for sure. This is awesome. So I know there's some folks that want to pick your brain that can't do it as directly as I can because they don't have your contact information. So why don't you share with people how they can be in touch and particularly where you publish some of your work. So.
Right. Well, I have a website. It's www.serveleadnow.com. www.serveleadnow, all one thing, .com. And there's a way to connect with us there. I'm happy to, I always answer every email that comes and join our mailing list or see what we do. And serveleadnow.com.
Awesome. Joe Iarocci, thanks for being with us.
All right, John.
It's been a pleasure.
Talk to you. Yes, indeed.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, folks, just a quick reminder that if you need some leadership out of the wilds of bad bookkeeping, or you've got some administrative tasks that are a nightmare, I've got a nice servant leader for you. And she really is a servant leader, by the way. That's Essie Escobedo, and she's the chief executive angel over at Office Angels. They're not a temp agency or a placement firm. They simply figure out what your needs are, and Essie sends an angel to fly in, get the work done for you, help you maintain and grow your business, and then they fly out when the job's done. So give Essie a call. If you've got problems with any of those things, give her a call, 770-442-9246. OfficeAngels.us is the website, and I can't speak highly enough about her and her people because I work with them, so I know they do a great job. And folks, do us a favor and subscribe to our show, North Fulton Business Radio, on any of the major podcast platforms. That would be Apple, Stitcher, Google, LinkedIn, or TuneIn, Spotify, Overcast. We're even on YouTube, but we're in all the major podcast platforms. North Fulton Business Radio is the search term. You can also go to northfultonbusinessradio.com and find our archive of shows. We're up to about 230 some shows or something like that, where we've had great business leaders like Joe on our shows, and you can search by their name or firm or their industry, what have you, on that site. So check us out there, and reach out to us on social media. We love to hear from you, whether that's LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. We're at North Fulton BRX. So for my guest, Joe Iarocci, I'm John Ray. Join us next time here on North Fulton Business Radio.